Hey guys, welcome to another lesson. So today is going to be a lesson on inflation, and we're going to start off looking at what they call real versus nominal values. And so the activity that I always like to do in class, which unfortunately I can't hear, is this one. All right, so I want you guys to think about what you believe is the highest grossing movie, and by the term grossing, where is it? Grossing just means the most dollars. Which movie throughout, from 1900s on, which movie has made the most number of dollars? So if you want to pause this and think about it, you can do that. It's a little more fun to try and guess, like the top two or three. So go ahead and pause it and think to yourself, which ones you think made the most money. All right. So go ahead and pause. Okay, so here's the list. All right. And so you can see that Avengers Endgame, so where's my marker? So Avengers Endgame is the biggest movie ever. They had almost $3 billion. All right, followed very closely by Avatar, Titanic, and you can see all the way down. Let me go ahead and switch screens real quick because I want to show you the full list. It's just kind of fun to look and see which ones are there. So let's see if this will get me where I want to be. Hang on just a second. I'm not seeing it. Damn it. Oh well, this will be okay. Uh, we'll just leave it like this. You can type this into um, Google and just put highest grossing movies ever. And so, anyway, so you get the idea. Avengers Endgame is the biggest. Avatar, Titanic, Star Wars: The Force Awakens. All right, that's the highest grossing Star Wars movie ever, and that was from 2015. So that made even more than the original Star Wars. The original Star Wars was made in, I believe it was 1977, which was one of the biggest movies we thought of all time. But here, The Force Awakens actually made more money than them. Jurassic World, Lion King from 2019. And so you can kind of go down this list again. Shouldn't be, oh, Minions. Gotta love Minions. Uh, and so these are, again, the highest grossing movies of all time. And so the question is, does this mean that they've made the most money? And so this is where I want to get into the distinction of what we call nominal values and what we call real values. Okay. So the word nominal, and this is going to be on a definition here in the slides in just a little bit. The word nominal means just the actual number of dollars. All right. And so in 2019, Avengers Endgame made 2.7, almost 2.8 billion dollars. And so I want you to take a look, and here's the key to all of this that I want you to be thinking about. Let's take a look at the year. All right. So if you look at the year of all these movies, all right, what's the one thing they all have in common, with the exception of Titanic right here? All right, and the thing that they all have in common is they were all made after the year 2000 at least. And so, does this mean that all of the films that were made before 2000, with the exception of Titanic, sucked? And the answer is obviously no. And so, what's going on? Why aren't any of the really big movies like Star Wars? Star Wars was one of the biggest. Another favorite was E.T. Phone Home. So E.T. was one of the big movies when I was a kid. It's nowhere near on this list. All right. And so here's kind of the idea. Let me see if I can clear all of these out. Clear options. Yep. Erase all the ink. Okay. So here's kind of what's going on. Think about Endgame. When Endgame came out, so it's the biggest moneymaker ever. A ticket price for a movie was $10. Okay, and we call this the nominal value because that's how many dollars it took you to go see the movie. All right, when Titanic came out, so it was 1997. I'm just going to make this up, but it's probably somewhere close. When Titanic came out, movies might have been like $7. And so here's the problem. So like Lion King here, we have a $10 ticket. Here's the problem. if you're taking a movie that came out when the ticket price was $7 and counting how many dollars it made, then comparing it to a movie that came out uh, more recently when the tickets were $10, is that a fair comparison? You know, I told you about Star Wars in 1977. The ticket prices then, and again, I'm making this up, but I think it'll be close. You know, ticket prices then may have been like $5. And so here you have a movie in 1977 that was selling $5 tickets, and comparing that to a movie today that's selling a $10 ticket. And so when we talk about the gross, you know, highest grossing movie ever, all it's doing is taking this number. So for them, let's see if we can do it over here. So it's $10, and let's just say they sold 1,000 seats. You know, that'd be $10,000. And so if we did the same thing with uh, Star Wars, you know, if they sold 1,000 seats also, their ticket price was $5, and so they only made $5,000. And so when we compare these, it looks like Avengers Endgame was twice as popular, but it's not. They were, according to this little example, they both sold 1,000 tickets, and so the problem is if we use what they call the nominal value, and that's the actual current value at the time, so $5 here, $10 here. If we're just using that nominal value, there's no way to compare across time periods. Okay, and so what I want you to think about now, and pause this in just a second, is knowing this. All right, knowing this idea of nominal values and what we'll use the term real value. Knowing that, what do you think was the highest grossing movie ever? All right. And I'm going to give you a hint. Well, the first hint is there aren't a lot of movies from the year 2000. All right. From the 2000s, because there's, you know, been almost a century's worth of movies made before that. And so think about which one is the highest grossing movie ever. And here's the hint: it was made in 1939. All right. And here's the other interesting part of this. In 1939, and I'm not making this up, tickets were $1. Okay, and that's why this movie uh, isn't anywhere close to being on this list, because even if they, you know, here they sold 1,000 tickets for these over here, these examples, uh, even if they sold, you know, 5,000 tickets, you know, 5 times bigger, they're only making $5,000. So anyway, the movie was 1939. Ticket prices were $1, and so the question is, which one was it? All right, so pause this and see if you can figure out, take a guess at any of the top 10. All right, so we will go. So here's our list. So Gone with the Wind, that is the big money winner. Gone with the Wind, ticket prices were $1 when the movie came out, and they, oh, I'm sorry, dogs are here. Let me pause this real quick. Sorry, this dog's barking at anything. Oops. All right, so ticket prices for Gone with the Wind were $1. Avatar, so I lied a little bit. There were 3 movies here. So we had Avatar there. That's our second biggest. So in 2009, we'll make numbers up. Avatar, that might have been $9 tickets. Here we have Titanic, 1997, 1977. So here's Star Wars. You know, this was clearly the biggest movie of the Star Wars series. And again, tickets might have been like $5. This came out when I was a little kid. I think I was 7, and you know, it was incredibly huge. And so, but you can also see, you get a sense of how big it is. Avengers Endgame, which came out just last year, is one of those biggest ones. All right, and so when we adjust for inflation, and that's what we're talking about. If you look up here, this means we're adjusting for inflation. Uh, Even Avengers Endgame came out really big. So now we get Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind was 1939. So now we're going to see some older years. So Sound of Music was really big. That's 1965. There's E.T., The Ten Commandments. All right, that was 1956. Dr. Zhivago, 65. But then The Force Awakens, Star Wars, it was one of the really big movies. Came out in 2015. So here's kind of how they do this. They say, look, let's pretend that all of these movies, let me wipe this clean again real quick. Sorry, it's slow. Erase all the ink. And so the question is, how do they adjust for what we call inflation? And inflation is when the prices rise. And so we know that the price of a ticket in 1939 was $1. The price of a ticket today is $10. And so you can't compare these two. And so kind of what they do, and there are some adjustments to this, but kind of what they do is that they pretend that all the movies that came out, they put the same ticket price on and then go from there. So they just pretend, Gone with the Wind came out in 1939. If the price of the ticket were $10, that would have been the gross total number of dollars. Titanic, if it had come out and the price of the ticket was $10. And so by doing this, you're taking away the effects of inflation. This going from $1 to $10, that's inflation. That's when the prices rise. All right. And so by pretending that all the tickets were the same price, that's when you get what we call a real value. And so these are what we call real values. And so now can we compare a movie from 1939 to a movie from 2009? And the answer is yes, by using the real value, by adjusting for the effects of inflation. And that's which one is important. The real value is the important number when you're trying to compare things over time. The nominal value is just, it is what it is, but it doesn't tell us anything about inflation. I mean, let's say that next year, let's say ticket prices are $10 in 2020, and then something weird happens, and next year in 2021, the ticket prices go up to $20. All right. And so clearly a movie from this year is going to be really big on that list of which movies made the most number of dollars, but it's in real terms, it wouldn't be accurate. All right. So that's the idea of real versus nominal. And we'll see as we go through how that is relevant or important. And so when we talk about inflation, inflation is simply the loss of purchasing power. All right. And so this is from the slide we just looked at. Is it fair to compare these two movies? And so here's the definitions that I said were going to be there. So nominal, I do want you to know this, is the value of the money at the time. All right. And so real is when you adjust, sorry about that. Real is when you adjust for inflation. Just for example, in 1984, let's do 85, minimum wage was something like, no, it was not 735. Just a sec. Erase all that. So in 1985, minimum wage was $3.35 an hour. This is the federal minimum wage. Today, the federal minimum wage, other states have it raised, Arizona has it raised, but the federal minimum wage is, I think it's $7.25, something like that. And so the question is, who is making more in nominal terms? You guys today, if you have a job and you're making $7.25, let's just put it, Arizona, somewhere around $12. Nominally, you're making more because 12 is bigger than 335. But when we convert it into real terms, we're going to introduce this term called purchasing power. And the question is, could I, when I was in high school working a minimum wage job for 335, who could buy more stuff? All right. Could I buy more at 335, more stuff? Or can you buy more with $12 today? And that's kind of the idea. All right. So here it is again. Real means adjusted for inflation. So it's on here a few times. So I want to make sure you get the idea. So real, adjusted for inflation. Nominal is just the current dollar value. All righty. So when we talk about real and nominal, we spoke about GDP in the last video. So when we talk about real GDP, that's the number that everybody looks at. And here's why. So to get to GDP, the formula would be how much stuff times the price. All right. And that'll tell us the GDP. And so let's say that we produce 100 things and in our country and the price is $5, then our GDP here would be 500 bucks. All right. And so the reason that we use real GDP instead of nominal. So imagine that if we were just using nominal, the following year we didn't produce any more stuff, but the price of that stuff went up to $7. So we went from 5 to 7. And so nominally, we earned, our GDP would be $700. But Remember, GDP tries to measure how much stuff has been produced. And so here's the stuff. So have we produced any more stuff? The answer is no. The only reason our GDP number is going up is because the prices went up. That's not what we're looking for. We're trying to figure out with GDP, did we produce more stuff? All right, and so what real GDP does is it takes away the effects of inflation. And there are formulas to do this. We're not going into it. And so in this scenario, nominal GDP would go from 500 to 700. All right, and remember, all that is the number. It doesn't mean anything. However, real GDP, if we started at 500, it would stay at 500. Whoops. I have a little problem here with my screen. All right, so it would go from 500 and it would stay at 500 because it would take away the effects of inflation. And again, inflation is when prices rise. Let me just run through this example real quick. Excuse me. I'll try and mute that the next time. So who had a higher real income? A person making $12,000 in 1929 or somebody who's making $73,000 today in 2017. And so the question would be, who has more purchasing power? And so if we convert this, this $12,000 in 1939, if we converted it into today's dollars, would be something like $207,000. All right. And so nominally, this person is making less, but in real terms, adjusted for inflation, they're making a lot more. All right. And so again, by using the real values, we can compare time periods. Here was the example that I was talking about. When I was in high school, I worked for $3.25, working at Pizza Hut. All right. And so if you got a job today earning $10.50, who would be better off? And so adjusting for inflation, my $3.25 would equal getting paid $7.25 today. And so the fact that you guys are earning $10.50 and actually now close to 12, you know, my $3.25 isn't close to what you guys would be making today. And so in real terms, you guys are much better off than I was back when I was in high school. All right, in terms of purchasing power of the money that you earn. All righty. So let's skip that one. I think we've kind of beaten this horse. And so let's look at, so when we look at debt, so this is our U.S. debt. And so you're going to hear in the coming months and probably for the election in November of this year, they're going to talk about the debt that we're in. And so we were, at the beginning of the coronavirus, we had a deficit, which means that last year we spent $1 trillion more than we made. And so we might see deficits coming up for the year of 2 trillion, maybe 3 trillion, something like that. And so the question is, are these the biggest deficits ever? All right, and this is how much, again, how much we're borrowing for the year. And so when you look at $1 trillion, that's pretty big. And it would seem like, hey, that's, you know, got to be one of the highest ever. And in nominal terms, it is. All right. In nominal terms, $1 trillion is one of the higher ones. All right. But when we adjust it for inflation, and so this down here, this is total debt in the 20th century. Notice over here, this is the percentage of GDP. And so, you know, if let's just for an example, if we picked a year and our GDP was $100 and our percentage of GDP debt, let's say it was, 60% of GDP, that means that we would have borrowed 60% of our $60. All right. And so this kind of gives you a sense that this takes out the effects of inflation. So you can see, let's take a look. So we can see here, this is pre-World War I. All right. So then our government spending went up a little bit, but not a whole lot. And so this is probably some government spending or military spending. And so then you can see it went down, and then we had this big jump. All right. So this big jump in debt was caused by, if you think you know it, go ahead and say it. This was caused by government spending to get us out of the Great Depression. All right. And so you can see our debt went up. And then we had this huge increase, all right? And this is our World War II spending because we borrowed a whole lot of money to go into debt. Now, this isn't exactly real dollars, but it takes away the effects of inflation because well, don't worry about that. So anyway, so now we can start to compare time periods. And so you can see from post-World War II up until 1985, 86, our debt was going down as a percentage of our GDP. Then the 80s hit and we started going up. Then it started to come back down a little bit. And notice what happened here. So now we have this other big chunk. And this big spike is what they call the Great Recession. Oh no, it's not good. All right. And so we're borrowing a bunch of money to try to get us out of the Great Recession. Now, one of the problems you can see is we kind of started to get out of the Great Recession, but we really haven't curtailed our spending. So we're still spending a whole lot extra. And that's another discussion. But anyway, so let me go ahead and talk about inflation real quick and just how we measure it and who gets hurt and actually who gets helped by it. So let me go ahead and show this video. This is just a couple of minutes, but this is Daffy Duck and their take on inflation.
Yeah, only 10,000 points to go and we got the highest score ever. We'll be the champs of Scrooge McDuck's Money Mania. We won! We won! Oh, no! It was booby trapped. Even a video version of Uncle Scrooge's just like the Beagle Boys. Let's play again. Uh-oh, I'm broke. I'm busted. Bubble gum. I'm sticky. Jeepers. It's only the first day of summer vacation and we already spent our whole allowance. Could ask Uncle Scrooge to raise our allowance. Yeah, you never know. He might be in a good mood. Uncle Scrooge, can we have a raise in our allowance?
Boys, I've told you before. If I raise your allowance, you'll grow up to have no respect for money, learn to live a wasteful life, and end up out in the street begging for a few measly coins. And then who'll take care of you?
Oh, I will. I'll be out there too.
You boys have to learn that you can never get something for nothing.
But Uncle Scrooge.
Why not get a part-time job for the summer? That'll teach you to have some respect for the hard-earned dollar.
You boys have stumbled upon my latest invention, the multiphonic duplicator.
The monkey wants a duplicate, who's it? Is it some kind of plant grower?
Oh no, it's a machine that can duplicate anything.
Anything? Will it work on this?
Sure, watch. This machine works on the principle of molecular restructuring by audio disruption.
Wow, now that's what I call a double your money back guarantee. Hi, everybody. You were right, Uncle Scrooge. Making money sure is fun. And so easy with the monkey hooper thingy smacker. Almost as easy as spending it.
Oh, no. Don't tell me you boys have been spending duplicated money.
Sure. What's wrong with that?
If it keeps duplicating, it could ruin the economy. How do you figure?
Yeah. What's wrong with having lots of money? You do.
Don't you see? If everyone has it, it loses value. Prices will go up. Then everyone will have to have more and more money. It'll be chaos.
Extra, extra, cash avalanche berries, duckbird. Prices going haywire. Read all about it. Only $200 an issue. Extra, extra.
That'll be $5,000.
I'll take two then.
$10,000, please. Exact change only.
Two cavities. That'll be $40,000 per filly.
Well, at least some prices haven't gone up.
Okay, so let me get this back. So that's just kind of a silly way of looking at it, but you get the idea that inflation happens when more money gets into the economy and it causes the value of each dollar to become worth less, not worthless, but just worth less. And we'll look at that a little bit more in just a second. So real quick, the way that the government measures inflation is something called the Consumer Price Index. And so if I were to ask you, excuse me, to measure whether the prices of stuff has gone up in the following year in Tucson, how could you go about doing that? All right. So sit and think about that for just a second. How could you create a method to measure whether prices had gone up over the next year? All right. So the way that you're probably or hopefully thinking, or maybe thinking, if not, don't worry about it, is what if we said, look, so we're in Tucson, and if I said measure price changes, measure your change in price. So what you could do is you could take, think of 5 different items, all right, and let's just make some up. So let's say we got a pizza, we got a gallon of gas, we have an iPhone. Always hard to think of stuff. Coffee and what? Bleach. I think is it E? I don't know. I'm just going to leave it messed up. All right. So if I said, how would you measure the price changes? So let's say that a pizza is $10. Gas has actually come down a lot. It's like $2 a gallon now. iPhone, let's just make up numbers, 700. Cup of coffee at Starbucks, $4, and a gallon of bleach, $3, whatever. And so this is for 2020, all right? And so to measure inflation, all you would do is say, okay, so now we're in 2021, what are the prices? And so let me add this up real quick. So it's 12, 712, 716, 719. So the total we call a market basket price, $719 for these goods. And so in 2021, we would measure again. And so let's say that was 12, gas gone back up to 4. Let's say that's the iPhone's now $720. Coffee is now $5. And bleach, let's say, went down to 2. And so when we add this up, so it's 16, 36, 46, 51, 751, 753. I think that's right. We'll go with it. That can't be right. Hang on. 720, 732, 736, 740, 43. Sorry. So $743. And so prices went from 719 to 743. And so the question is, did inflation happen? And the answer, quite simply, is yes. All right, prices went up. And so this is what the government does on a much grander scale. They have this thing called the price index, the consumer price index. And so here it is down here. And so they measure the changes in prices of goods every month. So this is a monthly measure. Oh, geez. So this is measured every month. If you recall, GDP was measured every quarter. So this is measured every month. And just so we know, our annual rate of inflation on average is somewhere around 3%. And that just means that if you buy a market basket of goods, and so you go to the store and it costs you $100, that would just mean that if you went to the store next year, it would cost you, instead of 100, it would be 103. And so that's inflation. And so the government does this on a much more elaborate, much more elaborate way. They have what they call a market basket. Okay. And so this was our market basket, these things up here. All right. And so the government's market basket is a little bit bigger than 5. They measure 80,000 products every month. All right. And so by measuring these 80,000 products every month, they're able to get a sense for what's happening to the changes in the prices. And again, this is consumer price index. There are other indices, fancy word, but there's other indexes out there that measure other things, because it's not just consumers that buy stuff. Producers buy stuff, they buy capital, governments buy stuff. And so there's another term, if you're ever interested, called the GDP implicit price deflator. So this measures the changes in all goods, consumer, producer, and government. But don't worry about that. So here's kind of how they do this. They measure these $80,000. They have what they call their market basket, and they put this into an index. And so this would be an index number. And so just for reference, 1982 to 1984 was the index value was 100. And so let's just put that, just kind of make this up. So the index value is 100. And so they measure every month the change in prices. And so let's say that we were here in 2015 and we go to 2016, we have a 1.3% increase in inflation, which means that this index value will have increased by 1.3%. And so looking at these indexes, we're able to calculate how much inflation has gone up. And so you can see over the last 4 or 5 years, inflation has been very, very low. The highest we had is 2.4, but you can see it was, in the ones and things like that. So, and then 2015, 0.1%, that's nothing. So that's what the government does, Consumer Price Index. I do want you to be familiar with this one. This will be on an assessment that we'll be taking. So measured every month, and it measures the change in price of consumer goods. All right, and so inflation, just real quick again, is a loss of purchasing power. So let me just give you a real quick example. Let's say that you were saving up for an iPhone, all right? And that iPhone costs $700. And you'd finally made it, scratch that because you'd buy it there. Let's say you're at 650 bucks in savings, all right? And so here's what inflation does. I'm gonna kind of use an extreme and say inflation doubles. That rarely happens in most countries. That has happened in the world. We've had pretty crazy inflation in different parts of the world, but for us, inflation doesn't double overnight or doesn't double in a year, but I'm gonna use the extreme. So let's say an iPhone is $700 and you have 650 bucks in savings, you're almost there. And so the purchasing power of this $650 is close to what an iPhone is, all right? So 50 bucks more, and this $700, the purchasing power of it is 700 bucks, all right? And so let's say that inflation doubles and now that iPhone costs $1,400. What just happened to the purchasing power of your $650? And the question is, it went way, way down. And so this would make you extremely unhappy, all right? One of the questions that I asked at the beginning of class of the semester was, what is a dollar worth? And this gets directly to what we're talking about. And so a dollar, it's worth 100 pennies. You get the idea. 10 dimes, 4 quarters, all that stuff. But that's not the answer, okay? The answer is, what is this dollar worth? And here's the hint. If we took, if we're in 1950 and I said, hey, here's a dollar, and then we're in 2020 and I said, hey, here's a dollar, which one would you rather have? And the answer is this one, this $1950, because you can buy more with this dollar that has more purchasing power, all right? And so, and it's like that because of inflation. Prices have risen over time. And so that's what we mean by a loss of purchasing power. All right, let's take a look here real quick. This is inflation in consumer prices. This is from 1970. All right, so where's my marker? There we go. From 1970 up to this year. All right, so you can see, and I've marked the recessions in here, and you can typically see what happens during a recession, but actually there really isn't a trend on this one. So let's see, this is 5%. All right, so we can go all the way across here. This is 0% inflation, meaning that prices haven't done anything. And then anything below this, there's a term called deflation. Deflation is when prices actually drop. And so you can notice it doesn't happen often. Here was a big deflationary time, and it's actually considered a very bad thing. We'll talk about that in just a second. So, anyways, let's take a look. So you can see 1974, we actually had, this is the biggest inflation we've had in quite a while, almost 25% inflation. That means that if we started off and something cost $100 at the beginning of the year, it now costs $125. All right, and so that was brief, but you can see for a while we had this problem where inflation, You know, during the 1970s, inflation was a problem in the U.S. for sure. But once we hit this time period and on, inflation, except for there and there, has remained relatively stable. All right. Again, it's between the 0 and 5% number. And that's considered really good. So we had this really brief moment of inflation here, and we had this longer moment of deflation there. And real quick, let me explain why deflation is bad, or why it's an indicator of things that are bad. Let's say that, and this could be happening today because of the coronavirus and the economic impacts. Let's say that the demand, well, let's take a cruise. Let's say that pre-coronavirus, you could go to Alaska on a cruise for $1,000. And let's say that was just normal price. Right now, well, they're not cruising right now, but let's say that right after they lift the restrictions, we might expect the price of this Alaska cruise line, because they're going to want to get people back on these ships. This price might be like $600. And so in one respect, we say, hey, this is good because now everything is cheaper. But ask yourself why this happened. It happened because of one of the worst economic an economic crisis, one of the worst ones we've had probably in the last, 60 or 70 years. 2008 was bad, and this might be shaping up to be equally as bad. And so we might say, look, this is a great thing to have lower prices as a consumer, but these prices are dropping because of something bad happening. All right. And so it's not necessarily a good thing. All right. So let me clear all of this off. Erase. And so you can pause this or just follow along. So let's identify the years that had deflation. So again, deflation is when there was anything less than 0. So just pick a couple. So we had, let's pick this one. This one was decently sized. That was 1986. Any year, you don't have to hit each year, but any of these years, so definitely 2009, we had deflation. 2015, it looks like we had some deflation. All right, which time period had the highest rate of inflation? Clearly it was this one. All right, and then we had some high inflation over here. And was there inflation or deflation between 79 and 83? All right, so 1979 was here, and 1983, let's just say is here. And so the question is, was this deflation? And the answer is no. All right, because did prices go up in 1980? Yes, they went up this much, 18% or so. Did prices go up in 1983? And they actually did. Let's just put it here. Let's just pick a point. And so were prices higher in 1983? And so you'd say, yeah, they actually went up, but they went up at a lower rate than before. All right. So this is called, I think, the term disinflation. There's another term that's not coming to mind right now, but and so inflation's still happening. As long as we're above 0, inflation's happening, but we didn't have deflation during this time. Okay, it was just inflation was going up, but it was going up at a lower rate. All right. So I know it's dragging on a little bit. I apologize. We're almost done. We got like 5 more slides, and so these are some of the more important. So what are the costs and consequences of inflation? So when we talk about this, some people actually benefit from inflation, some people actually get hurt. And so let's look at who that is. Borrowers will benefit and lenders get hurt. And so you can read through all of this. You can pause it. Let me just give you a quick example. If I lend you $10 and I say, look, I want to charge 10%, at 10% interest. All right, 10% of $1 or of $10 is $1. So at the end of the year, you give me back $11. And so the question is, what's the purchasing power? And if inflation stayed 0, can I buy more with this $11 than I could have with the original 10? And the answer is yes. All right. But what happens if over this time, now you and I sign a contract with each other, you're going to pay me a 10% interest rate. What happens if inflation goes up 30%? All right. And so now something that costs $10 when I lent you the money now actually costs $13. And so you've given me back 11, but it's lost purchasing power because this 11 won't buy that $13 item. So the purchasing power originally was $10, and now if I want to break even as a lender, I better be getting at least $13 back or I've lost. Okay. And so if you're a borrower, you're happy about this because this $11 that you're giving back is worth less than the $10 that I lent to you. Okay. And so you can go through and read this example down here. This is Chick-fil-A meal, but the moral of the story is that borrowers definitely benefit and lenders really get hurt. Okay. Rule number 2, savers are hurt by inflation. So where's my thing? Savers are hurt and investors can be helped. Stress can be. And so again, let's say that you had saved up $2,000 to buy a used car. Right when you get there, the price of that car doubles to $4,000. And so if you have that money sitting in a bank, if inflation goes up, that money is worth less than it was before. All right. And so a saver would get hurt. Now, what if you took your $2,000 and you bought a stock or you bought gold or you bought some type of investment? And let's say over the course of inflation, your $2,000 doubled as well. So now it's worth $4,000. So did you get hurt by the inflation? The answer is no, because your investment kept up with the rate of inflation. All right. Next one, people on a fixed income are hurt, definitely. And people with a COLA are not hurt. Okay, they're not helped, but they're not hurt. And so a fixed income just means that you're getting the same amount of money every year or every month, whatever it is. And so let's say, for example, you save up $1 million to retire. It's a good goal to have. Tough one to meet, but good goal to have. And you decide and you set it up to where you're going to get $2,500 a month to live off of in your retirement. So this is what they call being on a fixed income. You might have what they call a pension, and a pension is just payment after you retire. But anyway, so you're getting $2,500 a month. And so the question is, if prices start to go up, are you hurt? And the answer is definitely yes, because this $2,500 over here won't change. But if the prices of everything that you're buying go up, you won't be able to buy as much as you could before. And so you're definitely going to be hurt. All right. Now, this is on a fixed income. So this is assuming you're getting the same dollars every month. What if you are on what they call a COLA? That is a cost of living allowance or a cost of living adjustment. And so here's how this would work. Let's say you get $100 a month. And so this is, let's say, April. And you get $100. And then in May, they notice that, I think they do this yearly, but we'll just make it up. In May, they notice that inflation goes up by 5%. And so in May, if you have a cost of living allowance, they're going to bump this number up by 5% as well. And so now you're going to get 105. And so are you okay if inflation takes off and you have this cost of living adjustment, cost of living allowance? And the answer is yes, because you can still buy the same amount of stuff. All right. Almost done. Anyone providing a service at a fixed rate is going to be hurt, and anybody who is paying somebody a fixed rate would benefit. And let's say, so you sign a lease for an apartment. A lease is a contract, all right, that says I will pay you for the next 3 years $700 a month, regardless of what happens. And so if inflation goes up, this $700, the purchasing power of this $700 goes down. And so even if inflation goes up, you're still paying that $700. And so you are definitely benefiting. All right. If you're the person who is receiving the service, then you're the one benefiting. If you're the one who's providing the service, you're going to get hurt. Let me give you another example that might make sense. So let's say you're a babysitter for the kid next door, and you go to your neighbors next door, and you say, look, for the next 3 years, I will babysit your kid, hopefully a nice kid, for $13 an hour. All right. Would this be good for you? And so these contracts, and usually contracts aren't for this long. Usually they're just a year, and so hopefully you can kind of see why. If inflation starts to go up during these 3 years, the value of this $13 is going to go down, and you won't be able to buy as much stuff in 2 or 3 years with this $13 as you can today. And so, as somebody offering this service, this would be very bad for you, all right, because you're still getting the 13, even though the value of that 13 is going down. The couple who hired you to babysit is going to be very happy because they're paying you in dollars that aren't worth as much. All right. And rule number 5, producers of inelastic goods. So if you recall, before we left for our coronavirus vacation, no, it's not a vacation. I don't mean to make light of that. Before we left for the year because of coronavirus, we talked about inelastic and elastic goods. And so just as a real quick reminder, something like, and we'll do medicine. Let's make this a little bit more relevant. A ventilator, all right? And so the question is, are ventilators an elastic or inelastic good? And if you recall, if they are a necessity, they become very inelastic, all right? And so before this whole crisis started, and I've heard these numbers recently, before the crisis started, a ventilator cost somewhere around $15,000. Now, we are April 7th while I'm filming this, now the same ventilator is $50,000. And so if you're the producer and inflation goes up and you're selling a product that people are still going to buy, then you can benefit because these guys are making a lot more money. All right. If you're selling an elastic product that the consumer's like, I can take it or leave it, then you're going to be hurt by inflation. All right. And so if you're producing a luxury good, so think about the cruise lines. Cruise lines are very sad. All right. But if you're a producer of an inelastic good, any kind of medicine would probably fall under that. Coffee producers, same thing. So you get the idea. And so these people producing ventilators, if it was just all inflation, these prices are going up for another reason besides any kind of big inflationary pressures, but obviously. So anyway, so you get the idea. And then the last one, let's take a look at this. I think this is it, almost. So let's look at wages and apply this concept of real and nominal to your wages. All right, it's real and nominal. So what if you got a 5% raise, but inflation goes up by 10%? So let's say you're making $100 a day, and they give you a 5% raise. That means that you're now making $105. Are you making more in nominal terms? So are your nominal wages higher? Remember, nominal is just the number. All right. So your nominal wages are higher. 105 is bigger than 100. Now the question is, are you better off in real terms? So think about the purchasing power here and the purchasing power here. All right. And so if you got a 10% raise, I'm sorry, a 5% raise, if prices went up by 10%, then that means that this thing that cost $100 at 10%, the thing that cost $100 now would cost $110. And so even though you got a raise of 5%, can you afford the stuff that you could have afforded before? And so the answer to that, so we would say that your real wages, the purchasing power of your wages, has gone down. It's gotten lower. All right. And so that's another cost of inflation. If your wages don't keep up with inflation, back that up, if your wages don't keep up with inflation, you're going to have a problem. All right. And so if inflation's going up 3%, and here's one thing real quick that unions do, and just anybody's trying to negotiate a wage. So let's say here's your wage, and let's say you earn $10,000. All right. So when you negotiate a wage, if you say, look, I just want a 3% raise, they may say yes, but if inflation goes up by 3%, you have a nominal wage increase, but can you buy more stuff? And the answer is no. And so what a lot of people try and do is they say, look, this is the raise that we want. And then if we expect inflation, if we expect inflation to be 3% as well, then we're going to say, look, we want this 10,000. We want a 3% raise to cover the cost of inflation. And we want a 3% raise because we think we earn more money. So they would get a total raise of 6%. All right. So anyway, so this would be a real raise. Don't worry about this on a test. But if you follow this thing good, this would be a real raise of 3% because 3% is inflation, and 3% is your actual bump in pay. So anyway, in the last little bit, demand, there's two causes for inflation, and we'll talk about this in just a little bit more detail later. Demand pull inflation. There's a phrase that says there are too many dollars chasing too few goods. And so at some point in your life, you may have said, hey, why doesn't the government just give everybody $1 million? If I gave everybody $1 million, are we all going to be better off? And the answer is no. And here's why. And this is what we mean by demand pull inflation. Let's say that you own, let's draw another car again. Let's say that you own a car dealership, and everybody in the, make that the front, and everybody in the city or the country gets $1 million. You know, all these people, there's going to be, 20,000 people showing up at the car dealership, and the car dealer may have 100 cars on the lot. And so if all these people have $1 million, there's only 100 cars on the lot, then what are they going to do? Let's say the price of this car is 20 grand. If you've got, 1,000 people showing up for these 100 cars, you're going to take the price of this and jack it up to, I don't know, $100,000 or whatever it is. And so that's why in nominal terms, we'd all be better off because we'd all have $1 million more. But in real terms, definitely not, because all that's going to happen is the price of stuff is going to rise. And that is because people's demand for products is going to go up. All right, that's all demand pull inflation means. And finally, cost push. This means that the cost of running the business goes up. And so those costs get passed on to or into the price of the product. And so let's say that you're at Starbucks, or let's say you own your own coffee shop. This happened in Flagstaff. And let's say that you go from having to pay your workers $11, now you got to pay them 14 or 15 bucks. If you have to do this change overnight, if your cup of coffee costs $4, in order to cover these costs that you have to pay to your employees, you may jack up the price to $5. All right. So that's all that is. The cost of something happened to where one of the resources you use to produce that product, that cost has gone up. And so you just pass on the price to your consumers. All right. So anyway, so that's all for inflation, and we will stop it there. Hope you guys have a great day.